So, it's been a while since I've done anything particularly like this, and for what it's worth, it's been nearly a decade since I formally introduced myself in this manner. So here goes nothing. Hi there, I'm Chloe the Reviewer, and this is the Otaku Project. What was once a copycat of various different entities online that I looked up to when I was younger, now that I've grown and established my own sense of online identity a bit more clearly, I feel is needed now more than ever to try and showcase where we've come now more than just as a fandom of enjoyers of the medium, but also to help show newer fans of the medium series that may have fallen by the wayside or may have been forgotten about in the advent of newer series taking the public consciousness and attention away, and maybe showcase a few hidden gems here and there. Consider this partially a history lesson from my generation's experience growing up on anime and where the modern landscape has come since, while also being able to relate with a newer perspective on things to help show that while things may seem different, there's a lot of older anime that is on the same level as what we have today. And to help establish that, today as a bit of a primer for what's to come with the project in its rebooted form, we're going to take a look at a few titles that have been presented on this channel in the past, and give them a rapid-fire look over to help show you all what to expect of the Otaku Project Rebooted. Going all the way back to 4 years ago when we first started this journey out on this channel, it's the OG Toei Sailor Moon. When we first talked about this series back 4 years ago, when we mainly focused on the Dick dub of the series that only covered up until the debut of the Outer Senshi, so for the basis of this one, we'll be covering the series in full in its uncut format, and putting the focus on the newer Viz Media dub that was released back in 2014 onwards. Now, while I could tell you all that this series is basically redundant now with the creation of Sailor Moon Crystal, which essentially operates as a more manga-accurate iteration of the original story, I'd argue that even with Crystal's continued existence, OG Sailor Moon still has a place in the canon of anime, as much like its contemporaries in the similar veins such as Cardcaptor Sakura and even to a degree Magic Knight Rayearth, without this being at the forefront of the magical girl anime genre for the time, entries that we'll be looking at later on both in separate longer look-throughs and even ones later on in this rapid-fire look-through wouldn't have a chance to even be made as important or as distinct as they are now. Plus, while it may be more manga accurate, a lot of the stories presented in this series that weren't present in the manga, some of which being personal and fan favorites mind you, are lost as a result, and in this humble girl's opinion, make the overall focus not just on Usagi, but the wider cast of the Guardians as a result. That being said, given its length in total at a whopping 200 episodes and 3 movies alongside it versus Crystal's 29 episodes and 4 movies, I can understand why many would simply prefer Crystal for the brevity alone. But I'd argue if you have the time to binge through it all, you're probably set on experiencing not just the starting point for one of the best series of its genre at the time, but also the starting point of many of the creatives that we have been at the forefront of the anime scene for 3 decades now, and personally speaking, one of the better redubs that we've ever come across, as the redub done by Viz Media does a lot of justice for it on its own right, but also gives a lot of justice in the sense that it really does seem a lot more... We hesitate to say using the phrase a lot more to the original material and much more faithful in that regard, but it really is one of those dubs that works so much better because of how faithful it is to the original source material, and as a result, very much deserves its praise and deserves a look over at least once or twice compared to the original Dick dub of the series. Now here comes the point where I'd recommend it based upon any newer series that are out here. So... if you're a fan of most modern magical girl animes, but in particular any modern iterations of Precure, Jewel Pet, and Pre-Para, this will be well up your alley, as this more or less popularized a lot of the current genre conventions for a lot of modern magical girl animes, especially ones that are in groups like Sailor Moon was, but didn't take inspiration from the Magica side of the coin instead. Which leads us into our next iteration for the 90s, which so happens to be... Now, this one's a bit more complex given how dated it feels to be watching this now in our current climate. We've made it no secret in the past that we adore Ranma 1/2 as a queer story, and one of the bigger pioneers of the pseudo-comedy and battle shonen anime and manga of its time, and much like Sailor Moon, was partially responsible for a lot of people to utilize what it brought to the table for future instances. On top of that as well, without this series, and maybe Urusei Yatsura, but that's a whole other can of worms entirely, there's a high chance that the career of Rumiko Takahashi wouldn't have been as successful as we know it today, and series like Inuyasha and its sequel Yashahime wouldn't have happened, and the domino effect of that whole series spawned would have been missed out as well. But with all of that being said, if I am to be completely honest here, the original series of Ranma 1/2 that came out back in the 80s and 90s is, especially by today's standards, really dated given the conventions of queer narratives, and in my honest heart of hearts, I would recommend you watch the more recent adaptation that's been coming out since the last year. This is not just because of it being a more accurate depiction of the manga story in a similar vein to how Sailor Moon Crystal has done it with its manga adaptation, but it is also due to how the series has treated some of the aspects regarding Ranma and other genderqueer aspects surrounding it with a lot more respect than the original did. That being said, however, I would definitely recommend seeing this series if you have all of that in mind regarding its place in the timeline of anime, and especially with its general treatment of Ranma Saotome as a character regarding their aspect both as a masculine, feminine, and even gender-fluid character. To say as well that certain episodes of the original series which are exclusive only to it aren't worthy of going back to either would be a disservice to it as well, as there are a lot of episodes exclusively to that anime which were made as filler as which ones would be worthy of your time. Especially given that the fact that some of these anime exclusive episodes from the original anime from way back when have some very genuine nice feeling moments of gender euphoria and character reasons as well. So this would, in my honest opinion, be part of the only reason to go back to it. But if you are genuinely curious about the initial steps for more comedic battle series and shonen seinen anime in general, I'd recommend it so long as you are aware of the fact that the series itself is very dated by modern standards and may reflect the time that it came out on all fronts. For modern anime fans, if you like Nisekoi, Dandadan, and Beelzebub, this is right up your alley, as it's very comedic in its execution. The romantic subplots can be a bit interesting at times, but the heart of it is still worth a watch for all considered. I hesitate to say if it has the same level of impact today as to what Sailor Moon has for its time in favor of Takahashi's other works, but I'd feel it's a piece of history in both anime and manga form in general which still deserves its flowers, even now. Look, I get it, we've talked a lot about this series before on this channel, and if you haven't seen all 5 hours of it by now, really, what are you even doing here? But it's all the more reason why we will try to keep this one as brief as we possibly can. Because Utena is arguably one of the most important animes not just for shoujo, but also what would become the magical girl genre of the time to come after its inception. Given it came out in the same era as such powerhouses like Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura, it's shocking that until recently it hadn't gotten its flowers until its popularity rose on the internet sphere in the last 5 years or so. Especially given how the team working behind it more or less is working on some of the most influential works not just the last 2 decades in anime like the examples I'll cover in literally a few seconds, but is also currently working on one of the most hyped works of the current anime season as of recording, writing and releasing in Gundam GQuix. Gundam GQuix, which if you're loving how the series is presented in its first 3 episodes, I would instantly tell you that you will adore Utena and then some. But if you needed some completed works to go off, easy examples for this are Mooro Penguin Drum, Sarazanmai, and Bungo Stray Dogs, as the people who worked and made it the series that it is today all worked on those animes and are still working on some absolute classics, literally right now. some 2 years ago now when we talked about this, we attempted to talk about Nadesico as much as we could without spoiling a lot of its charm for the overall experience. And we stand by a lot of what we talked about at that time, as March's success in Nadesico was, at its time and still even today, is an influential anime for the era of post-Anoism in the 90s anime sphere of influence, and came at a time where it was needed at that point more than ever. As not only was it the first major works of future anime mainstays Tatsuo Sato and Sho Aikawa, the latter of whom is responsible for such anime such as Fullmetal Alchemist 2003's adaptation, which we dissected and went through at length last October. But Sho's working credits also include the likes of Eureka 7 AO in 2012, and even outside of anime specifically, worked on the main writing team for tokusatsu shows such as Kamen Rider Blade and Go-Go Sentai Boukenger, two series lauded as being some of the best of their respected eras of tokusatsu. And Tatsuo Sato's more modern works show that his love of the medium, especially for mecha anime, shines through in his first work, as Nadesico shows that Sato has always been a lover of comedic anime plots as he is a fan of sci-fi and mecha anime. When all of that comes together, you get a series which, to us anyway, manages to showcase the very best of what the mecha genre could be for this era the series made its mark in, and show that the genre didn't have to be as submerged in the dredges that Evangelion had dragged it into, and it could still be a fun time for all involved. Yes, it does manage to poke fun at its fans from time to time, with its in-universe show being a bit on the nose at times for what came before Nadesico. And yes, it is very much a series which, while it does have good messaging behind it, it does get a bit inane at times with how it presents its story. But overall, we'd personally recommend checking it out for the fact it's an arguably forgotten classic of the time which deserves as much respect for the time as series like Captain Tyler, and even series that came after it like Vandred in blending comedy with serious wartime space opera stories. And if you're at all interested in this, I would highly suggest this series if you enjoyed Bodacious Space Pirates for the comedic space adventure aspects, and Lagrange The Flowers of Renee for those who wanted to experience Sato's love of the mecha genre in full force and liked what he showed off in Lagrange. As well as this, we'd also recommend this series for those who enjoyed Rumble Garandol and Alpha Noah Zero for series which follow a similar premise on either the comedy side or its more serious side of the coin respectively, as this series does definitely have its moments of brilliance on both sides of the coin throughout its run. Yet again, another anime we went over as much as we could without spoiling it for you all a year ago, but we feel like we kinda had to at the end of it in order to get our point across. But speaking about Anohana, the flower we saw that day as a full anime, and not just the characters' story arcs respectively, it's arguably one of the most important animes of the early 2010s era, not just because of its placement in a season full of important animes like the previously mentioned Madoka Magica, but also because of the team behind it. Tatsuya Nagai, Mari Okada, and Noriko Ozaki, who as individuals have either been responsible for important and dearly beloved anime before Anohana, or were responsible for some of the most heart-wrenching, realistic, and amazingly written shows since Anohana. But as a team, they all collectively have managed to create one of the best coming-of-age anime not just of its decade, but I'd argue of all time in Anohana, as it still ranks highly as one of my favorite animes of the era, even today. And I'd even argue stands as a benchmark for anime of this caliber. The series itself, focusing on how a group of childhood best friends reunite 5 years later in their adolescent years following along from a traumatic event which led to the passing of one of their group and fractured their group as a result, showing how the trauma surrounding that and their relationships from far back then have impacted them so badly in their current day. While it does have some small moments here and there of joy and hope, it is a story which unfortunately focuses hardline on the fucked up dynamics and characters within it who are trying to come to terms with the laundry list of items they couldn't properly process as children because they were fucking kids! And not only that, it manages to show how that expands out to not just the families of those affected by it, but those connected to the people affected in modern day, and even the crowds they hang around with and in their own relationship dynamics showcased as well. But in regards to the overall aspects of the series on their individual merits, the characters, immaculately shown as complex creatures formed by the traumas experienced in their childhoods, but eventually all manage to come together to work through them all one by one and help their deceased friend move on into the afterlife how they can. The animation, beautifully done by A1 Pictures and headed up by Masayoshi Tanaka, who was one of the heads of the project alongside Okada and Nagai. The music, some of the best OSTs I've heard of the time, and its openings and endings still rank highly for me to this day. In essence, every part of the series is worth enjoying from beginning to end, and for a series which is only 11 episodes long, it's well worth your time to binge.
For newer fans, if you like Nagai's recent efforts in A Certain Scientific Railgun, or adore Mario Carter's works in Kids Neither and O Maidens in Your Savage Season, or their collective works as a duo with Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, you will absolutely adore Anohana, because it takes the complex relationship dynamics from Iron-Blooded Orphans and the rawness of adolescent trauma in Kids Neither and in O Maidens, and blends them together in a way that people still adore to this day.
But if you want something a bit more lighthearted, Kyoto Animation's musical juggernaut K-On! Is right up your alley, as this is essentially what I would argue to be the complete antithesis of what Anohana is at its core. As it's light and fluffy and absolutely adorable, it has no issue trading in the seriousness for a bunch of shenanigans at every turn. And would you believe it, it's another one we spent a lot of time last year going over in detail bit by bit. But to summarize our points as concisely as we can regarding it, we consider K-On! As a franchise to be one of the best things Kyoto Animation and the writing duo of Naoka Yamada and Reiko Yoshida have done as individuals and as a collective entity. From the presentation of it being based off a full-cover manga in the similar vein as Azumanga Daioh and Lucky Star before it, to essentially creating it as its own beast separately in response to its success, K-On! Essentially became the benchmark not just for slice of life or music anime for a hot minute, but anime in general with how it changed the game at its inception. To the point where we'd personally argue that the impact of K-On! Outclasses even previous KyoAni creations such as the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, or the Key trilogy before it as one of the more influential works of KyoAni's filmography, had with how it's impacted anime today. With its cast of characters being some of the most adorable yet highly comedic dysfunctional groups of people I've ever seen in a band anime ever. At least until more recent animes that have come out in the last 5 years, more on that in a bit. The animation is peak era Kyoto Animation. Take that for what it's worth, as it's essentially the art style for when you think of moe anime as a genre, as well as slice of life anime in general, with it being some of the brightest, beautifully done anime of the time, which would show you exactly where KyoAni would go as a company from here. The music? It's arguable the OST is one of the most iconic of this run of KyoAni's era and is only comparable to the likes of Nichijou, Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, and Violet Evergarden for the most noteworthy and instantly recognizable OSTs made from KyoAni's wheelhouse. And that's not even accounting for the insert songs from this series, as the insert songs, openings, and endings are some of the best of the time, to the point they've even been put in as cover songs for the likes of successive franchises like Bang Dream, where you can play most of the most iconic songs from this franchise in their gacha rhythm game on mobiles. All of which I have full comboed for the record, and if all of that wasn't enough for you, it's still to this day one of the most profitable animes of the era it came out in, and even to this day is recognized as one of Kyoto Animation's breakout series, which still to this day has fans clamoring for more.
But while we may never get a season 3 of this show in particular, if you enjoy music anime such as Bocchi the Rock or any of the seasons of Bang Dream, minus It's My Go and Ave Mujica for obvious reasons, or if you like Yamada's recent works like Sound Euphonium or A Silent Voice, this is well within your wheelhouse of enjoyment and a heavy recommendation as such.
For those who enjoy anime about passion projects being a bit more in the realism realm, however, with a dash of drama into the mix, Bakuman is absolutely one to watch for sure.
We talked about this one last year as well, but only talked about it in tandem with non-anime The Bear, and probably spent too much time on that one compared to the likes of Bakuman. So as an apology, let's talk about Bakuman in more detail in this one.
Bakuman's story is arguably one of the most slow-burn stories we've seen in a long time. It spans out several years continuously in storyline for a duo making it to the manga industry of the late 2000s and trying to make it big into eventually creating an anime. The duo in question being Moritaka Mashiro, whose uncle was his hero as a gag mangaka, who died overworking himself to make a big anime. passing down his love of the game to Mashiro, who, despite being traumatized by his untimely passing, is inspired by future partner and up-and-coming writer Akito Takagi to partner up to make their dream of making manga a reality together, while also at the same time trying to make it big so they could get an anime made of their work so Mashiro's crush and aspiring voice actress Miho Azuki to voice in it eventually, with her and Mashiro sharing a budding romance and inspiring each other from afar throughout the series' run. With a story made originally in manga format by the creators of Death Note and Tsugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata, and adapted into anime by Kenichi Kasai and the previously mentioned Reiko Yoshida, it's no surprise the series is as much a rollercoaster ride emotionally as it is a great tale of realism within the realm of manga creation. The characters involved aren't perfect, however. Some of the story bits, in my honest opinion, do get a bit grating at points with the dramatic tension on what will be the straw that breaks the duo of Ashirogi Muto at last. But I'd be lying if for its 3-season run in anime format, it doesn't keep you hooked season to season, it keeps you locked in until the climax. With animation done by the team at JC Staff, who had basically been relegated to light novel purgatory with the likes of Raildex, Shada, Data Life, and the familiar of Zero, and only saw success outside of those 5 main franchises with the likes of Toradora, it speaks volumes that this was as big for them as all the previously mentioned alongside it. And given that it was headed by the anime side by Kenichi Kasai, who had directed the anime adaptations of Honey and Clover and Nodame Cantabile beforehand, and was a cornerstone of the creative team behind JC Staff in the late 2000s, it speaks volumes, no pun intended, as to how this one series has managed to have so much talent behind it and showcase all of that talent both within its writing as much as it has shown how grueling and stressful the industry it was created in can be on both sides truly.
To that end, I'd recommend this for new audiences if you like Shirobako, Your Lie in April, and Keep Your Hands Off Aizoken, with an extra special recommendation for Kasai's later work in a Manchu, as well for bonus points of the director still being able to showcase his talents in a different style of storytelling.
And finally, we reached the most recent anime to be covered for different reasons on this channel in Serial Experiments Lain. While we focused heavily on the aspects of identity and whatnot in the last video we did on this channel, we really didn't cover as much of the series itself that we would have liked to. So, to make up for it, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it all. Serial Experiments Lain comes from the line of Yasuyuki Ueda, and alongside him director Ryutaro Nakamura and writer Chiaki Konaka. If any of those 3 names ring any bells for you whatsoever, then you know for a fact what kind of anime this is. As the total creator team behind this has the collective works of Kino's Journey, Hibernate Renmei, Technoxyle, and that season of Digimon, and Ergo Proxy behind them. You know exactly what kind of series this will be off the bat with that alone.
But to say that Lain is just a mindfuck is the coward's way out of talking about this series. So let's break it down a bit more with the way that it manages to talk about the world of technological advancements in a pre-turn of the millennium era, and shows us what happens when you let your identities bleed a bit further out than you would like to.
I don't think we were being as blunt on the subjects surrounding the series, mind you, so let us make it clear that while it is not just a mindfuck, it is simply one of those where if you are potentially susceptible to maladaptive daydreaming or have any variety of dissociative identity disorder, be forewarned this series can and will mess with your head if you are not careful. However, if you think you can handle it, the series will reward you with some of the best talking points of identity both online and offline, philosophy that is still used as talking points for modern anime to look at to this day, and genuinely feel like some of the most interesting form of writing in an anime of its time that doesn't feel like bollocks or wank from the writers behind it. And given the fact that the creative team behind this would have the likes of Hellsing Ultimate, Ghost Hound, and Airgear behind them in the future after the series came out, it only stands to reason as to why this one particular series is still seen as a pinnacle of 90s anime, and arguably deserving to be labeled a classic for its time, and to now.
And I recommend this series to anyone who's enjoyed the surrealist nature of series like Sunny Boy and Wonder Egg Priority, with an additional caveat to those who enjoyed Flip Flappers, with its talk of identity playing a massive role in the plot of that series. And with that brings us all up to date. So, with what you can expect with the Otaku Project going forward, I guess one thing has to be accounted for. Are y'all kids ready to learn about the history of what came before you? Because if so, Are you ready for an autistic trans woman to talk about it with all of you? You're absolutely fucking not prepared is what you're probably answering yourself right now. But that's fine. Next time when we talk about this here on the Otaku Project, we're going to be looking at something in particular that I've wanted to talk about for a very long time, and I made the mistake of trying to compare it to another series in the past. So, join me here next time as we discuss a forgotten classic of its time, and maybe even show you where certain childbearing animes got their start. But until then, I'm Chloe the Reviewer, and until next time, Janmata, my otaku family.
This video was made possible through the support of patrons like the ones you're seeing on screen right now. If you like videos like this one and others on this channel, please consider supporting them via the Patreon link and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for the time, and catch you later.